Hello everyone, this is the video for doing your debate rebuttals, which some of the principles are the same for the constructives, but it's a little bit different, so I wanted to go over happens in a rebuttal. First of all, what is a rebuttal? This is not the time to make new arguments, like offer new advantages or disadvantages. Say your negative partner in the constructive argued that digital media promote polarization and divisiveness. Um, this is not your time to also say that digital media lead to a bunch of disinformation. Um, you can maybe say that in response to another argument, but not as a new advantage or disadvantage, right? Um, and you kind of have three major tasks in a rebuttal speech. First of all, refute their arguments. What advantage or disadvantage did they offer? How do you respond to that? Second, rebuild or reuse your own arguments. Rebuild, that is, if they've already responded to one of your advantages or disadvantages, can you defend it? Can you build it back up? Or reuse, that is, a lot of times these arguments, like the advantage, directly clashes with the disadvantage, right? So the affirmative is saying digital media are great because we have all this new access to information and transparency. And the negative is saying digital media are bad because it promotes all this disinformation and fake news and such. So you can use your fake news argument to answer their transparency and information argument, right? Reuse it. So remind us of that argument and point out how it answers their argument. And then you provide sort of an overview or a final statement or a closing argument. Why, given what they have said and given what we have said, how do we win the debate? Why should you vote for my side? Some tips on doing rebuttals. You still want to use sources and evidence, and if you notice in the debate grading rubric, there's still a requirement to use a couple of sources and evidence. You don't have to answer every individual argument, every single link or impact that they make in the constructive, but you must address each of the major points overall. That is, if they have an advantage or they have a disadvantage, you need to have a couple of responses to that advantage or disadvantage. That should also, you should try to diversify your responses just like you would do, and you try to diversify your arguments in the constructive as well. Because if you only make one and they tear it down, then you have nothing left to stand on. And comparison can be key. That is, why are your sources superior? Why are your impacts bigger? Why is your advantage more important? Why is your advantage more well supported than their disadvantage, etc.? Part of that comparison will be impact evaluation. Which impact matters the most? And I'll show you some ways to do that here in a second. When you're rebuttaling, just be sure that you flag or signal what it is that you're rebuttaling and responding to. So restate the claim you're answering, right? They claim that digital media promotes innovation. Then state your claim as a response. This is disproven by a study. This is overblown. This is not the fault of digital media, but the fault of the user. Those are just examples, right? So they say, digital media makes people narcissistic, and you say, first, they claim that digital media makes people narcissistic. I think this is not the fault of the media, but the user, right? And then I offer my support for that claim. Here's some evidence that suggests that that's the case. Here's my reasoning, right? It's more likely that people were narcissistic in the first place and attracted to social media rather than social media making them something that they weren't in the first place. My examples, et cetera, et cetera. So comparing arguments, you have an advantage, they have a disadvantage. How do you compare these things? You can talk about the qualifications, right? We have better qualified sources. We have more sources backing up. You can argue one is more fundamental or more of a root cause. This fake news stuff is, just a side effect of digital media. the great thing about digital media fundamentally is that how much more access to information we have. And of course, that means more access to disinformation, but that's just sort of, a side effect, not the root cause. Argue one undercuts the other or ties into the other. If I win that digital media promote innovation, then that will create jobs, right? So therefore, my argument is more fundamental because if we win innovation, we also promote jobs, which is their disadvantage. You can argue one is unanswered or answered less, right? We win this debate because they didn't really respond to our citizen journalism advantage. They didn't really respond to our innovation advantage. Or they only had one response to our innovation advantage. And this is what it is, and this is why that's insufficient. It doesn't address all of these other arguments that we made. Another kind of debater trick you can use is called uniqueness. You can say that this will occur anyway, or that there are other causes of this. So for job loss, you could say, well, they'll just send the jobs to the third world anyway. Or, there are other causes of job loss besides robots. Or you can say that the arguments are not inherent. That is, that they're not necessarily the fault of or tied to digital media, right? Digital media replacing jobs isn't the fault of digital media. It's the fault of greedy bosses, right? Digital media making people addicted isn't the fault of digital media. It's the fault of individuals for, not better regulating themselves. An important thing you can do in the rebuttal is argue the impacts too, that our impacts to our advantage or disadvantage are larger. Again, I mentioned this in the last slide, but you can have numerical impacts, like how many people die of heart disease, or you can have values, right? Freedom is our most important value. And you might have to do a little bit of outside research to find a statistic or a good quote on some of these impacts. But I think especially in the rebuttal, thinking about why these things ultimately matter. Why are jobs important? Why is innovation important? Why is terrorism such a big threat? Can really help you do this final comparison thing, which is arguing essentially in your wrap-up why, for instance, your impact matters the most. And you can do that a few ways. First of all is magnitude, right? This just affects more people, or the harm of it is larger, right? They're talking about making people happy. We're talking about people dying, so the magnitude is larger. They're talking about a few people. We're talking about millions of jobs being lost, so the magnitude is larger. The frequency is another way you can compare impacts. How often does this happen, right? Is this a one-shot thing, right? Like, we're going to lose some jobs to these robots, but then new jobs will come back and we'll kind of figure it out after that. Or is this something that's going to recur over and over and over again? People are going to continually be addicted over and over and over again to digital media. Another way to compare your impacts is probability. That is, how likely are these things to happen? Is this a long time in the future? Have we done a good job of rebuttaling it, of minimizing it, reducing its likelihood? Thereby you can say, this isn't as probable of an impact, so it's not as big of an impact. And then time frame is the final one here. How fast does this happen? How soon does this happen? If it's something way in the future, then maybe we don't impact or value it as much as if it's something that's affecting people right now. So a lot of this impact evaluation can happen in your final wrap-up, which I recommend maybe like the last 30 seconds to a minute of your speech be sort of the final wrap-up. So you're spending most of your speech answering their main advantages or disadvantages, and then you get to this point where you're sort of telling us why we won the debate, right? We've won this advantage more cleanly. They didn't really have a lot of good responses to it, and the impact affects more people over a shorter time frame, and that's why we've won the debate, right? You don't have to go for all of the arguments that you make. That is, say there are two advantages in the 1AC, and you feel like you haven't really won one of the advantages. You can just argue the other advantage and argue that that's the most important, right? So say there's a citizen journalism advantage, and there's also a access to information advantage, and you think that they really answered the active access to information argument. Um, you could just go for, or in your wrap up, stress citizen journalism and stress why that's a really important impact, why we need journalists, we need a free news media. Um, and by doing so, you can still win the debate. And the point here is you don't have to win every argument that you make to win the debate. If you can win one advantage or one disadvantage and prove to us that that's the most important one, then you can win the debate just on that. And that's what you should be doing in your sort of final wrap up, is telling us, why is this the most important one? Why have we won this advantage most cleanly? So that should give you an idea basically on doing rebuttals. If you have any questions, we'll again have office hours on Friday, and hope to see some of you then. Have a good the rest of your day.